Hello everyone. Today's use case is we need to have a button on the opportunities that when clicked, a user would get the option to specify how many payments to create based on the amount from the opportunity. Payments is related to opportunities. If they specify the number of payments to create, then what the flow does is it creates the number of payments specified, divides the amount of the opportunity by the number of payments for each one, then the payment date to be at 1 month interval in the future from today. So let's look quickly how it is currently built. First, we will need a record ID. We use that record ID to get the opportunity. We only need the ID and the amount fields. I'll explain everything in detail in a little bit, just going through it quickly first. And then the screen displaying the amount and asking how many payments to create, assigning the amount and the opportunity ID. We are assigning the payment date using a formula. That formula is adding a variable number of months, and that now variable number of months is being updated for each iteration. We are adding 1 month to each. For each one of those payments, we are adding it to a collection, and then we are counting the number of iterations, and we are checking if it equals the number that the user has inserted. So for if the user inserts 10 payments, then we are going to check after the first iteration if we reach a 10 or not. If not, then repeat, and then all the way until we reach the number that the user inserted. At that point, we will stop iterating. We already have all the record variables in a collection, and we go ahead and create that collection. Now let's build this from scratch. So that's going to be a screen flow. First, we need the record ID variable. Now, every time we add a flow to a record page um, through a button, if it's going to be a button, then we need to create a variable called record ID. It needs to be in this spelling. The I is capital. And then we make it available for input because it's sending data from outside the flow into the flow, input into the flow. If it's going to be not a button, but it's going to be a flow component on a Lightning page, then from the settings of the Lightning of the component itself on the Lightning page, you can pass record variables, record IDs into the flow. But that's separate from this case. Here we need the record ID to use it to get the opportunity. Then I will use a get element. We need to get this opportunity. opportunity. The opportunity, which opportunity we need to get? The one that has the same ID as the record ID. And then from this opportunity, all we need is the ID and the amount fields. Then we'll have a screen in which we will first display the amount from get. You always have to click that twice. So we need to display the amount, and then we need to ask the user how many payments they need to create. How many payments. You could add a help text telling them that this is going to be 1 month interval of today. I don't like the I don't want the pause, and I don't want the previous. I'll change the custom the next button or finish button to say create payments instead of finish. And then the header as well, I don't need this because it's usually the flow name. Sometimes we name the flow different from what we need the user to see. We can add a display text up top with formatted text better than that the name of the flow. I'll name that screen info screen. This is display text amount. Now that we have this screen, next thing is that once thinking ahead, once we create the payment, then we need to specify the amount, and that amount is the same amount for each one of those payments. So I'll create a formula that would calculate this amount. So amount per payment, and that amount is basically the amount of the opportunity divided by the number of payments. So amount for opportunity divided by the number of payments, that's the number of payments that the user inserted on the screen. The data type here is the amount, that's a number. So now that we have the amount, and when we create a payment, what are the fields that we need? We need the ID, the opportunity ID, and we need the amount, and we need the date. So now that we have the amount, now that we have the amount and we have the ID, we can start assigning values. Use an assignment element, assign opportunity ID and amount. So where do we need to store these values? We need a record variable for the payment. So I'm going to create a new resource that's a variable. It's a record payment object. MPSP payment. I'm not sure what the other object is. I'm going to use MPSP, non-profit success pack payment. And this is the record variable payment. Usually it's common that the first letter is it not capital for some reason? Why? I'll just keep it as is. So for this record variable payment, I need to specify the amount, PSP amount, to be equal to amount per payment, and then the opportunity ID on this record variable opportunity would be the one that we got a little earlier, the opportunity ID. Now we assigned the opportunity ID and the amount. Next, we need to assign the not assign. We need to add it to a collection. Um, Basically, eventually, we need to create multiple payments, not just one payment. So now with a record variable payment, we have one payment, but we don't want to create only one. We need to create multiple. So at the end of the day, we need to have a collection that we add those many payments into this collection. So let's create the collection first. Let's collection variable underscore payments record payment. That's a collection. Now that I have this collection and I assigned the values to the first record variable, let's add it to a collection. Add to collection. So collection, here's the collection, and to it, I want to add the record variable payment. When I click it, it opens the fields inside, but then I want to click outside to pass on or send the entirety of the record. So I added this record variable to a collection. I want to explain this process in a little bit more detail. One thing we need to do now is that we need to repeat this process because we are not only going to create only one record variable, we need to create multiple. So we need to create assign one record variable, add it to a collection, then assign the next one, add it to the collection, assign the third one, add it to a collection, and keep repeating this process. To make this repeat, I click this plus, connect to element, and I will connect it to the assign. This is how to make it repeat this process. We'll need to adjust this in a minute, but just for the purpose of explaining this. Now, what this is doing is, so this is the first iteration now, like this is the first time we loop through this. You know, we are not using a loop element, just a loop without it. So on the first iteration, we have the record variable payment and we are assigning it some values. We are assigning it this value, we are assigning the ID, disregard the payment date for a second. So we assign these values, and then we took this record variable and we put it inside the collection variable. And then on the second iteration, we assigned it some other values. In this case, they are the same values, and then we took it and we added to a collection. One thing to keep in mind is that every time you update a record variable, only the most recent values remain, others don't. So in this case, we have gone through 4 iterations. So assigned the first one, and then after we assigned it, and then we started the second iteration, we assigned different values. This no longer exists. It's only the most recent one. And then when we assign the third one, this no longer exists, only the third one. And same here. When we assigned it the fourth time, only the fourth values remain inside this record variable, nothing else. All the past ones have been reassigned to new values. However, when we did that, after we did the assignment and we added it to a collection, it's like a copy of it has been added inside the collection that's different from this. So this has gone away. These no longer exist. But then copies of them already exist. It's like copies of them already exist inside the collection variable. So I'll get back to this when we need to talk about the payment in a minute. Now let's go ahead and assign the payment. Now the payment date. The payment date we need it to be at 1 month interval for today. So that's today plus 1 month. Let's start at this point. The first payment needs to be today plus 1 month. So I'm going to create a formula, and I'll name it payment date, and that's a date, and then that's today. To get today's date, that's flow.current date, flow current date, or today function. Now today plus 1 month. To add 1 month, there is a function called add months. For add months function, I need to specify from which date, which is current date, and then how many months to add. We need to add 1. Now let's keep it as is for a second and then look at this. Now what the formula is doing is it's looking at today's date. We are currently in October, and it's add on 1 month. So in the first iteration, what October plus 1 month, that's November. And then on the second month, the formula is going to calculate again. So follow the current date, which is the same as today, plus 1 month, that's going to be November as well. And then when it calculates for the third time, it's going to be November as well, which is wrong. We don't want it to be November all the time. We need it to be November, and then December, and then January, and then February, and so on. Meaning, inside the payment date, this one shouldn't be fixed. It should be changed. It should be a variable. It should be 1 on the first iteration, 2 on the second iteration, 3 on the third iteration, and so on. So to make this one a variable, we will need to create the variable first. Let's go ahead and create that variable, and that's number of months. That's a number, no decimal places, and then we need to start with 1. We need to start with 1 because on the first payment, we need it to be after 1 month. So when the formula calculates for the first time, it needs to add 1 month. Now, the number of months is 1, and then back on the payment date, we'll edit it to be number of months instead. Number of months variable. Now, what the formula is doing is today plus the variable, which is 1, which is November still, and then November again still. Now, how can we make this variable change with every iteration? We'll use an assignment element here. I'll name it add 1 month. Excuse me. Now, the variable number of months, here it is, I'll add 1. So what this is doing is for every iteration, this number of months is going to be updated from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 for every iteration. And when it is updated, after it is updated, we go back and then we have not assigned the payment date yet. But after it goes back and we assign the payment date is going to recalculate. So on the first time, it's 1. On the second iteration, it's 2. On the third iteration, it is 3. So it's adding the correct number of payments. Now let's go ahead and assign this payment date to the payment. I'll use an assignment again, assign payment date. On the record variable payment and then payment date, that would be payment date formula that we create. I'd like to point out that when we create a formula, it does not calculate at the time of the creation of the formula. It creates at the time of being called. In this flow, we are calling the formula, we are asking the formula to calculate in this assignment. So the formula is going to calculate only when it is called at this point in the flow. The formula has a variable inside it called number of months. Number of months is different. So in the first iteration, like the flow is going through the elements, and then when it reaches here, it calculates the formula. It finds out that the number of months is 1. So it calculates today, today's date plus 1 month, that's November. And then here we change the number of months to be plus 1, which means 2. Now the value of number of months is 2. And then we go back and we are going through the second iteration. And then once we reach this element, then the formula is going to calculate again to find out that the number of months is now 2 instead of 1. So today plus 2 months, that's December. So now the date is calculating properly. Back to this diagram for a second. The amount was the same, the ID was the same, and the payment date was changing, and we are changing it for every iteration. That's, I mean, I know I put January and February here, but I mean, we have October and then November and then December and so on for every iteration. And when we add them to collections, we take the first one with its payment date and we add it. You see January, February, March. So for every iteration, before we add it to the collection, we update the payment date and then we add it to the collection. And again, these values no longer exist. It's only the most recent one. But because we have added them to the collection before we did the reassignment, then they remain inside the collection as copies. Now we assigned the payment date and we assigned the amount and the opportunity ID. One thing to note here is since the amount and the opportunity ID are always the same, they are always the same, then there is no need to go back and assign them again. Like when we do the iteration or the loop, it's not exactly a loop. When we do it, we don't have to go back to assign opportunity ID and amount. We just need to change the payment date. These values can remain the same. That's fine. So I'll just reroute this on the payment date instead. So far, so good. Maybe I should ask, so far, so good. Now, if you notice, something is totally off here is that there is no end element on this flow. The flow will repeat, like once we reach this point, it will repeat infinitely. There's no end. So this is not how we want it to be. We need it to end. So when do we want these iterations to stop? We need them to stop when we reach the same number that the user inserted. So number of payments. Basically, we need to create a specific number of payments that the user has inserted. So if the user says we need to create 10 payments, then we need to do 10 iterations, and after 10 iterations, we need to stop. Meaning we need to count the number of iterations and compare this count to the number that the user inserted. To count, let's take them one by one. Let's first count the number of iterations. To count the number of iterations, we need a place where we can store this number and make it count. So I'll create a variable called counter. That's a number. And the default value is 0. Now this counter has 0 now. It has no numbers in it. And then inside towards the end of the iteration, I'll create an assignment. And that's add to counter. Or maybe add 1 to counter. Counter add 1. What this is doing is for every iteration, it adds 1 to the counter that we created. Now, this counter, after 10 iterations, it's going to say 10. After 20, it's going to say 20. So now we know how many iterations we have. Now, the second part is to compare that number of iterations to the number that the user inserted. To do that, we'll use a decision element. And then is counter, or maybe counter equals number of payments. And then yes and no, like to keep it simple. Now counter, does it equal or maybe greater than or equal to the how many payments? So that's the number that the user has inserted. What this is doing now is after the first iteration, it checks if let's say the user inserted 10. Now, after the first iteration, the counter is 1. Is 1 equals 10? No. So what happens after no? We need to repeat. And then on the second time, we need to repeat. Third time, we need to repeat. Until it says that the counter reaches 10, and then that's the same number that the user inserted. And then when 10 equals 10, what should happen? We should end the flow. We're not exactly ending the flow, but we are ending the iterations. Now that we assigned the opportunity ID, assigned the amount, assigned the payment date, counted the number of iterations, and then we have the collection variable that has all the record variables in this. We need to create that collection variable with the create element. Create payments. That's multiple and payments. Let's save this. Create payments 2. I'll deactivate the first one and then I'll activate the second one. And let's also go ahead and look at how to add this as a button from the object. I'll click setup and then edit object. I'll go to buttons, links, and actions, a new action, and that's going to be a flow under action type. I'll select create payments 2. I'll just name it create payments. I think it's not going to accept it. Yep, that's fine. Now that we created the button, let's add it to the page layout. Add it to the donation layout under mobile and lightning. Let's create payments 2. Just add it here and then save. Now I'll go ahead and create a payment of type, an opportunity of type donation to get to this layout. Excuse me. The amount is 1,000. Stage is pledged. I mean, it doesn't matter. Now we see the create payments 2 button up top here, and then I should have clicked not to create. So there is an automation that creates payments automatically. I'll just delete this for now. Well, we are testing not having any payments at all, and we need to go ahead and create this. So we have on the amount, we have 1,000, and we need to create 10 payments. So each payment is should be 100, and then the dates should be November, December, January, and the number of payments should be 10. So I'll click create payments, create in 10. Right. So we have created the 10 payments, each one is 100, that's correct. And then we have November, December, January, February, and so on. Let's take this chance to test something very interesting. So if I go ahead and create, say, 200 payments, now we have 200 payments. Now let's try the schedule payments button. That's something different. It's from Salesforce. This button is it's creating payments under opportunities, and it's also creating payments under accounts. It's limiting it to 12. So let's just say it verbally. There is something called SOQL limit, SOQL limit, and the limit is 100. SOQL is basically any get query. When we use a get element, that's this part here. Like find these opportunities that are meeting these conditions and return them. That's a SOQL query in a nutshell. So we can only use 100 SOQL queries in one transaction. If we reach 101, then the flow would crash. So just to be mindful of this, if we're going to use a get element, or if we're going to use an update element, in the update element, part of it, when we specify conditions, we have a SOQL here. So this is also a SOQL query. So one get element can use a SOQL query, and one update element can use a SOQL query as well. So let's be mindful to reduce the number of SOQL queries that we use. Otherwise, if we reach more than 100 in one transaction, then the flow would crash. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time. Salam.